There's a good chance that if you're watching from a democracy, it has a written constitution. It protects you from government abuse, and it can only be changed with widespread support, safeguarding it from authoritarians. But the UK has none of these protections. Absolutely any law can be changed by just 50% of lawmakers. It's pretty dangerous. Let's get into it. Most democracies have a written constitution. It guarantees a bunch of civil rights to people and sets out how government works, among other things. And most importantly, it's rigid. That means that if anyone wants to change it, it's a lot more difficult than making a normal law. It might require 67% of lawmakers to agree, unlike the normal 50%, or even a public vote. And some constitutions even have eternal clauses, parts which can't ever be changed, at least in theory. One key reason why these limits are imposed is so that authoritarians can't trample people's rights and take over government. But the UK is unlike virtually every other democracy in this regard. It doesn't have a written constitution, and it only takes 50% of lawmakers to change any law. So at least in theory, UK lawmakers can do whatever they want. Ultimately, there's really no limit to what they can do. And that's pretty scary. If authoritarians gained power, there wouldn't be much to stop them. And the problem is made even worse by the other parts of the British system. To start with, UK lawmakers are elected under first past the post, so Parliament is typically controlled by the representatives of only a minority of voters. And on top of that, the government, particularly the Prime Minister and their cabinet, has a lot of power over the House of Commons, Parliament's main chamber. So in reality, power over Parliament is mostly concentrated in the hands of the Prime Minister, rather than the hundreds of lawmakers who support them. That makes it easier for one powerful individual and their lieutenants to dominate the agenda and create whatever laws they like, much as what happened in 1930s Germany. Now, the second chamber, the House of Lords, is more independent from the government and does challenge problematic laws, but it can only block laws for 1 year, which wouldn't stop a determined authoritarian government. It could just wait it out. And there's quite a lot at stake. There's a bunch of really important laws which can be changed quite easily, and some politicians already want to do that. One of the biggest is the Human Rights Act. It protects human rights in the UK, but Parliament can already choose to ignore it. And some Conservatives want to replace it with a British Bill of Rights. In a lot of democracies, this would need widespread support from across the political spectrum. But in the UK, it would only need the backing of a minority of voters. And the autonomy of the country's constituent nations is also at risk. Scotland, for instance, has its own government and laws, but there's nothing to stop the UK Parliament from simply abolishing the whole system. Indeed, Parliament could even abolish the monarchy, and it briefly did for 11 years in the 1600s. And this isn't just theoretical. In 2019, the country came very close to a political crisis because of it. Boris Johnson had just become Prime Minister and wanted to hold an early election to force through his Brexit plan, which the opposition and even some in his own party opposed. But there was an obstacle. The next election was scheduled for 2022, and the election law required 67% of lawmakers to support an early election. Johnson held a vote on it and failed to get anywhere near 67%. Now, he could have sat down with the opposition and worked out a compromise for his Brexit plan, but instead he decided to exploit the fact that the UK lacks a written constitution. In many countries, the election law would be rigid, so it could only be changed by 67% of lawmakers. But the UK election law was itself a normal law. While it required 67% for an early election, the law itself could be repealed by just 50% of lawmakers. It was essentially an honour system. It worked so long as everyone wanted it to work and were willing to respect the spirit of the law. But the moment anyone disagreed, they could just ignore it. And in fact, Johnson didn't even repeal the law. He just introduced a new law which simply ordered an early election. It directly contradicted the other election law, but Parliament can't bind itself. So essentially, whatever it says most recently takes priority. In the end, the main opposition party decided to support the new law, so it was passed by 67% of lawmakers in any case. But had the opposition not changed its mind, an early election could well have been called against their wishes, with just 50% of lawmakers in favour. That could have triggered a political crisis. Opposition parties might have claimed that their right to have a say in an early election was trampled by an overzealous government. And everyone knew that if Johnson won, which he did, the election would have profound consequences for the UK, with him free to fully implement his Brexit plan. In some ways, it's a testament to the quality of British democracy that important protections like the Human Rights Act have survived until now, and that the country hasn't succumbed to authoritarianism. Up to now, voters and politicians have respected democracy, but it's still a very precarious position to be left in. In recent times, the world has seen the emergence of liberal rulers who are willing to dismantle democracy, like Donald Trump in America, and indeed Boris Johnson and his associates in the UK have at least flirted with that avenue. Ultimately, there's no guarantee that just because British democracy hasn't failed so far, it can't possibly fail in the future. The lack of a higher level of specially protected fundamental law in the UK is a big vulnerability. In the worst case, it leaves the UK more vulnerable to authoritarianism than other democracies. It might be a good idea to think about addressing this issue.